Welcome back. Here in the second session of our Introduction to Excel, we're going to take a look at the Excel data types that you're going to run across when using Excel. So here are the 5 different types. Obviously numeric, because that's mostly what you're going to want to be doing, is working with numbers, but you may not have realized that there are these other 4 types, which we will get into in more detail shortly, but there are also character, text, or string data types. Then there are dates, which are a separate data type. If you are using more advanced formulas, there are logical values, both true and false. And then there is also an error data type. So the error data types pop up when you do something like, say, dividing some number by 0, which produces a division by 0 error. So let's take a little bit deeper look at the numeric type first. Well, obviously this is the most common type. And the thing that you should understand is that Excel uses a preprocessor to try and figure out whether what is in a cell is really a number or not. And it will make, or an attempt to make, a conversion if you attempt to do some kind of formula on that number. But it's also doing other things, such as when you type in a date, it is converting that number type into a date. One thing to know or understand, if you know the difference in between integers and complex values, is that most all numbers on a spreadsheet are basically complex values, meaning they have fractions if it is a number that has a fractional component. You have to actually use different functions to get or force a number to be an integer if for some reason you need an integer. And integers are numbers that do not have any fractional piece to them. More on that later. Now, one thing that you're going to want to be careful of is that there are so many different formatting types in Excel that frequently you'll be looking at a number and it will appear that it does not have a fractional part because of the formatting type. And if you try and do something with that value, expecting or not knowing that it has that fractional component, you may get an answer that you don't expect. So you need to be a little bit more cautious and take a look at what the actual number is that's underlying a calculation if you sometimes get a result you're not expecting. So here we are looking at the numeric data types and some examples. So you can see here in cell B4 that up here in the formula bar, you can see that what is displayed here is exactly the number you're getting. So this is the number that is in Excel. So you need to be aware of the fact that it could look slightly different depending on the way that it is formatted. And I'll get to that in just a second. So here, if you need integers or numbers that don't have any fractional parts, you have to use a function. So this int function here is a function that will convert a number that has decimals into an integer. So you can see here it took out all the decimal parts after the whole number. But what I'm talking about is where you need to have some caution here is let's say, we haven't talked about this, but I can get rid of the decimal parts of both these numbers. And now they look like the same number, but they're not. Because if I were to use an if statement and say, if that number is equal to that number, then say equal. Otherwise, not equal. So what's going to happen is it's going to say not equal because they are not equal, because one number has this decimal component and the other doesn't. So that's just where I'm trying to say you need to use a little bit of caution. So that you can do certain things. So here, I could use this simple formula here where I'm subtracting B4 from B6, and I can just get the fractional component of that number if I wanted to, doing something like that. Now, we haven't talked about character strings, but we're going to talk about that in a minute, but just wanted to show you this is a little bit more information about this pre-processing that Excel is doing. So this number here, if you look up here in the cell bar, you can see I put a little apostrophe here at the beginning, and that actually forces Excel to think that that object or that number there is really not a number. It is a text string, because there is this function here called isText, and this evaluates what's in a cell to see if it's either a value or text. So it thinks that that is actually a text string, like ABC is a text string, okay? So it thinks that that is just like any other text string, not a number. But if you look here in this formula here, I'm taking what's at that cell, that text string, and I'm adding 1 to it. And you can see that Excel has decided, oh, he must want me to convert this because this sure does look like a number. And I'm going to add this 1 to it that I put here, and I'm going to return 4. So again, you need to use a little bit of caution about how Excel is doing some of this pre-processing. So moving on, we have character, text, or string values. I'm going to just refer to these as string values moving forward just for consistency, but strings are not really numbers. You can have, say, a column of strings. If you had a list of people's names in one column, each one of those would be a separate string. They can be manipulated in lots and lots of different ways. But you cannot perform math on strings because they're not actually numbers. You can join them or split them apart. You can reference one string in one cell and do something with a string from another cell. And they can be searched and modified with functions as well as different formula as equations. So here are some of the very basics about strings. So here at cell B17, I've put in this small string here, which for historical interest, if you were, say, trying to get your ham radio license many years ago, you would have to learn, I think you still have to learn Morse code, but this little string has every letter in the alphabet at least once. But this is just some examples about what I could do with this string. So for example, I can use this function here, len for length, which is referencing that cell, B17, and it tells me that there are 44 characters in that string. Or if I wanted to, I could come down here, and here I'm trying to find out where the letter Z is in this string up here. So you can see find Z. So B17 is the cell that it's looking for, and it's looking for the letter Z, and it's telling me that that's at the 39th position. So that's way down here at the word lazy, which is almost towards the end, but you can count backwards from, looks like -5 to get to the Y, and spaces are considered one character. So that's some of the basic things you can do with strings. Okay, the third data type is the date data type. So if you're going to get one thing out of this brief presentation, note that dates are actually numbers, or at least there's numbers underlying the date that you see when you look at them in Excel. You can split the date, the actual number. There is a whole number component and a fractional component. So the whole number component is the date, and the fractional component is the time. So there's many different ways that you can format dates. As you can see down here below, you can have the full date, you can have an abbreviated date, you can just have the day that date is represented by. So let's take a look at some examples. So here we are back at Excel again, and just very briefly, I just wanted to show you what Excel is doing automatically for you sometimes that you may not realize. But here I'm on this one cell that has nothing in it, B50, and if I go up here, I can look at how this cell has currently been formatted. So it has this general format, which is kind of the default on a new spreadsheet, the way a cell is formatted. Now, if I come in here and I type in a date like this, you can see if I go in here and I look at how this is formatted, it has been converted from the general to a date format automatically for me. And it's using one of the pre-selected date types over here. So I just wanted you to see that so you kind of understand a little bit more about what Excel is doing for you automatically. Now, here on the example sheet, there is a function called now, and if you put that function into a cell, which is what is here, it gives you the current date and time. So here I'm doing a little bit of math with dates. So today is the 7th of July, and here I'm just taking and I'm just adding 1 to the day to get tomorrow, which is the 8th. If I want to, I can use functions. So there's a month function that will return the numeric month of the year, right? So there's 7. And then I can do some things with the time if I wanted to. If you'll recall when I was showing you earlier the numeric data types here, I basically have a formula here that's taking the full date and time, which is at this cell, although you can't see the time, it's hidden behind here, and I'm using the integer function to parse out the time component, and then over here I'm just showing that piece, and I have formatted it for the time. So you can see here, if I look at format types, see here, the type is time, but this is the number that is underlying up here at B7. You can see here, I'm just grabbing the number that Excel is creating here. So next we have the logical data type, and I'm not going to get into this too deeply, but just realize that a spreadsheet cell can have a value of true or false. So here's some examples. You can see here that I have a true here, and you can see what Excel's processor is doing here, because if I type in the word true in lowercase, it forces it to uppercase. So this has a meaning to Excel. Getting into the logical values is a bit beyond this course, but just suffice it to say that this is the 4th data type. The 5th and final type is the error data type. So just basically, these are values that get returned when something that you have done, typically a formula, returns an error. So for example, dividing any number by 0 is going to produce division by 0. Now these can be helpful in certain circumstances, a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial, but suffice it to say that they do have a practical function for different uses. Here's some examples. Typically you'll see the most common one is this division by 0. So up here I'm just showing you what that looks like. Another one that you'll see is this pound reference. This pops up a lot when you have cells that are not returning or are not able to return a value because of some way that you've specified something in it, and then this other value function is another error function. Now you can do certain things with these, returning these functions and other functions, but just understand if you see this pound sign in front of something that looks like this and it doesn't make any sense, that it's an error function.